but the real dialogue that makes the difference, trains the mind, purifies the heart, and contributes to a new consciousness, the new consciousness we need to solve our problems globally. This kind of dialogue is what really matters and is really useful. So that was the first thing that I got from listening to you at the beginning. And it also then occurred to me that as the Dalai Lama, as you know, always emphasizes the fact that dialogue must respect differences just as much as similarities. And it's easy to build up the similarities and then sort of push the differences under the carpet. And this afternoon well, just as you did, we both recognize the wisdom of that approach. But and it does sometimes seem to me that there is something wonderful about discovering a common ground where there are profound similarities, sometimes almost exact. It seems almost exact similitudes, but they are still similarities. There's always difference. Otherwise, you would say it is the same. It's like a double image that you need to put together. So, I think difference, strangely enough, is at the heart of communion. That I often feel too, even maybe through a psychological level, it's through recognizing and exploring and accepting the differences between ourselves and others that we come closer to them. There's a deeper experience of unity through difference sometimes than through similarity. Because similarity is itself a resonance between differences, but it doesn't eliminate the difference. And there's a mystery there, a paradox there, which maybe we can take up again later. I thought what you were saying about the new relationship of religions, your openness, well, more than openness, your readiness and your discovery, as it were, of the possibility of seeing that God, the concept of God or the idea of God, is not the impenetrable barrier between Buddhism and Christianity as is often presented. I think that's a really important point and something to be further explored. And the challenge to Christianity in that, of course, is that either the Christian rejects it, or we recognize that we, as Christians, have almost two meanings or projections about this word, God. One is an anthropomorphic picture of God, which can serve a good purpose, and the Dalai Lama often says this. I think some Christians sort of feel it's maybe damning with faint praise when he says it, but he says, it can be very useful for you to believe in this kind of God because it will motivate you to virtuous action, and even the fear of punishment will make you try harder, and that can be very good. So that there is maybe not even so much a value, but an inevitability in the human mind to anthropomorphize God. But as the Christian teachers from the beginning have said, indeed as the Bible itself says from the moment of the burning bush, we cannot rest with this image, this anthropomorphization of God. And St. Augustine says, if you can understand it, it isn't God. And Thomas Aquinas says, anything we say of God, we must use human language and metaphors. We paint God in a human way, but we use this language, these images, in a completely different way when we're speaking about God. Even if we say God is good, or God is loving, we're using a language that we can understand, humanly speaking, from our own experience, but we're using that language, in fact, at a different level, in a different way, a more evocative way. So that's one meaning, of course, of God that Christians accept, and they recognize the value or the inevitability of that. But there is another meaning of God which is emphasized by the mystical tradition. And there you have richly expressed throughout all the Christian mystics the idea expressed by Meister Eckhart, who said, "I pray to God to rid me of God. Please God, get rid of God for me." To go beyond images, or St. Gregory of Nyssa, who said that every image of God is an idol, and so must be constantly dissolved. So I think in your comments about religion and about the usefulness of this term God, I thought that opened up many important further questions for us. One question about faith and belief I'd like to put before you, because it's fresh in my mind, because I just wrote a little book about it. And I spoke about it actually with His Holiness the other day. And the basic idea is, in every language, these two terms, faith and belief, are used almost interchangeably. And yet I think they mean quite distinct things. We think of faith as having, as part of the way we handle beliefs. But it seems to me that in the new era that we are entering into, where Buddhists can speak about God and Christians can speak about going beyond God, it's important for us maybe to have some new tools, and that these two concepts, faith and belief, can be taken off the shelf and polished up a bit and sharpened a little bit. And I think of faith primarily as a kind of a universal human capacity for something. And I was first awakened to this many years ago when I heard Father Bede speak about faith as our capacity for transcendence. And if we apply that to just ordinary human experience, when we commit ourselves to another person, to a relationship, to a work, to a community, to a job, that is exactly what we're doing. We are saying, I will be faithful to this, or to this person. And we all, I think, humanly speaking, recognize that faith in some way enhances our humanity. If we have to break a commitment, to end a marriage, or to give up a job, or to walk away from some project that we are involved in, that we committed ourselves to, there may be a good reason for it, there may be an inevitability about it. Nevertheless, we all recognize that there's something sad about having to break that kind of faithful engagement of ourselves. And so, whereas if we celebrate faith, like a couple who've been married for 60 years, or an anniversary of ordination, or the Queen's Jubilee, that's what we were celebrating, her fidelity, really. So, a faithful commitment to something. So faith is our capacity for transcending the ego's tendency to separate, to hold back. And faith, as Saint Irenaeus said once, is the beginning, love is the end, and the union of the two is God. Faith, it begins in faith, it leads to love, and the union of the two is God. So faith is this capacity then for commitment, for transcendence, and ultimately for love. And belief, on the other hand, as you said, is inevitable too. Even people who say they don't believe in anything believe in not believing in anything. So belief gives us the value system, the conceptual framework, the doctrinal or dogmatic system, which enables us to keep going, to make sense of life, to have a sense of reasonable purpose and explaining to ourselves why we're doing something. So faith and belief supporting, I think that faith is supported by belief. So if this distinction is useful, it helps me to understand what Raymond Panica said, that we are able to create a community of faith among people of different beliefs. And that seems to me where interreligious dialogue could take us without blurring the edges or trying to put everything into a blender. So those were some of the many points that I picked up. Maybe on salvation and enlightenment themselves, I'll hold my fire on that until this afternoon, and then. But I think, are they the same? I sensed. It seems to me they're not the same, but they are intimately connected, and they're not the same because they represent different emphasis of the two traditions. But if we balance the emphasis, Buddhism on enlightenment perhaps, and Christianity on salvation, if we try to balance that through this kind of dialogue, then we find they maybe even correspond to each other in the same way that faith and belief do. That they are different, but they are connected. And I think, again, this is not just an intellectual play. I think it is a kind of playing with ideas or with quite deep values, which could help to create a better climate in the world, in which we can collaborate more usefully, experience our oneness in diversity, and learn to transcend, our self-interest. Nothing is more important when we face both the economic and the ecological crisis that we face today. I think that the other questions that you reminded me I raised, how much personal effort is needed. Again, maybe we can come back to that later, but this is reflected in an old argument in the Christian tradition, which goes back to Augustine. Actually, it was Augustine at his not so great. He had a fight with John Cassian over the question, and St. Augustine, partly because he lived so long and wrote so much, tended to win all his arguments, because he outlived his enemies and wrote so much that the church had this incredible body of not altogether consistent theology to work with for the next 1,500 years. But here, the old argument about which comes, what is the relationship between personal effort and grace? And Augustine, at this period anyway, in his life, was emphasizing the priority of grace, and felt it was dangerous to allow room for Cassian's idea that we have to make effort in order to receive this grace. And even though Cassian says it is God who creates the first spark within us. So everything is ultimately dependent upon grace, but then after that we have to work for ourselves. And I think it's kind of an endless argument in a way, but I think meditation, the practice of meditation in both our traditions, gives us the answer, which is that you don't make much progress without effort. And if we, even the distinction maybe between meditation and contemplation, which Christians often raise this question, what is the difference? And the simplest answer I have that seems to be accurate to me is that meditation is the work we do, that we have to do, in order to receive the gift of contemplation. But contemplation itself is a grace, it's a free gift. It's not something you get out of a machine when you put a pound coin in. It's not meditation is therefore more than a technique. Maybe we could pick this up also, because there are many contemporary ways of speaking about meditation, quite popular and even useful ways in some sense, which emphasizes meditation as technique, which can produce results that can be measured. And it may be that we start with technique, but as the practice continues, I think the motivation is changed and the attitude towards the practice is changed, and we find ourselves slipping into, even as the physical and psychological benefits of meditation begin to be felt, we find ourselves slipping into something more, into what we could call a spiritual dimension. And then, almost imperceptibly sometimes, you find yourself engaged in a discipline of self-transcendence rather than in a technique of self-enhancement. But that would be interesting to explore a little bit more on this question of personal effort. On the question of the concept of the person at the core of the two traditions, in a way that all hangs on what happens in the next life. And I can only say I remember as a boy, arguing with, or in pubs, you would often have arguments about those sort of questions. I don't see, tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't see that spending too much time speculating on what happens after death is justifiable. It can only be speculation. And maybe what we can do is to compare the different scenarios of the afterlife or the next life which the different traditions have produced. Reincarnation, or the idea of the continuation of the purification of the soul in the Christian understanding of purgatory, even. Purgatory operates in a sort of timeless zone. So maybe we can compare those different scenarios, but I wonder whether it is so useful to speculate, as there is no data that we can draw upon and agree upon. So that seems to me where the concept of the person. Otherwise, I think the mystical tradition of Christianity totally accepts, as the teaching of Jesus makes clear, that what we think of as the person, my ego, identity, as you nicely described, is not permanent and not consistent and is not me. Whoever I am not my ego. And so that is, I think, we don't have to argue much about that. And the question of, as I say, of future lives, or the continuation of this life in another dimension, and of the process of this life in another dimension, seems to me interesting, but I don't know where it takes us. So anyway, those are some responses to the things you were playing with, and thank you for that. So wherever you'd like to start from, or however you want to proceed. Maybe, is there anything you particularly want to respond to?
I'm happy to have you take the lead.
Would you like to respond to those? And we are due to break in 10 minutes the questions. So are you happy to erode a bit of your lunchtime to have a bit of extra time for questions? Because I think it will be worthwhile having a response to that. Thank you. So let's go ahead with the response and then we'll open up to questions. Thank you. I'm sure you've got some burning.
So, oh, we have one here.
I'll put it a little closer.
A little bit closer, yeah. I sometimes think we should live in greater proximity so we could have more leisurely conversation. I'm off to Norway this evening because these topics are so rich and I think worthy of deep discussion, communion even. The first thing that struck me is the appreciation of differences brings together a greater sense of closeness. Sounds almost like koan. Father Lawrence's koan. Because the obvious one is the obvious, and is almost so obvious it's a truism, is that as we get to know each other, we've gotten to know each other over the years, the more that we see that our aspirations are common, the sense of virtue is common, the sense of vice and evil is common, our aspirations, the similarities in our modes of meditation. As soon as you started teaching, I thought, is that him teaching or me? Did you read my script? You know? And so when we see this commonality, the deeper common ground, that lays the foundation for affinity, for empathy, for real communion. And so perhaps that's just so obvious it doesn't need to be said. But then if one says the opposite, then one says, okay, now if that was true, then how can the opposite also be true? So here we are. We just started off with the contemplative inquiry, where we're going, as Nicholas of Cusa emphasizes so strongly, that when we come to the culminating realization, it's where all the polarities vanish. And it's not to say that A was equivalent to B, but it's that you've transcended the differences. Not to find that they were the same, but you've transcended the differences, right?
And that's St. Paul on the mind of Christ. In Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. So all religious, social, and even biological differences. I thought Nicholas Cusa says God is the union of opposites. Does he?
It could very well be the union or simply the transcendence where they vanish.
Yes.
Yeah, and whether there's a real difference between those two statements, but it seemed that he emphasized from for very little reading I've done, I've read two of his books written in 1453 around that time, is that we're venturing into a realm that is so beyond the scope of the intellect. As you say, if you understand it, that's not God. Yeah. So beyond that, you're not simply saying, okay, that which I did understand, I now understand to be unified, but rather now I've just simply gone into another dimension altogether, where the differences have vanished.
Post-linguistic dimension.
Yeah. But when you made that comment that the appreciation of differences can give rise to a greater sense of closeness, I think about the career that I would have followed had I not found a spiritual path to which I wanted to devote my whole life, and that was ecology. That was ecology. I thought this is one thing in which I have total faith, that this is, total conviction, that this is worth doing, this is meaningful. And I still feel that way, although I'm very happy with the life I followed. But the reason I mentioned that is there's one of the profound essential truths of ecology, and that is a healthy ecosystem is not homogeneous. It mustn't be. If it is, it's doomed. And so a healthy ecosystem is where the diversity of species and so forth, they are there, and then that's intermingling, that interdependence among the diverse, and sometimes very different, so very, very different, species of plants and animals. That's what gives rise to stability, to growth, to dynamic, to the sustainable ecosystem, is where they're not so different that they're going to chew each other off, drive each other into extinction, which the human species has done to many other species. So not that different, right? That we want to obliterate the competition, like humans, according to evolutionary biology or anthropology, Homo sapiens wiped out the Neanderthals. There was a contest, we won. Okay, so there it is. But rather an array of differences where the differences actually augment rather than set us into fierce competition of win and lose. So militant evangelical Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, and so forth, where they're clear winners and losers, right? And so in that regard, to attend closely to the differences and see, but these are necessary. Now, I must say, I feel reservations about a notion, whether it is exactly His Holiness Dalai Lama's view or simply an easy interpretation of his view, but I feel very, very, how do you say, a lot of reservations about the notions of taking religious beliefs and placing a value on them only for their instrumental value. I don't feel comfortable with that. I mean, I see their truth, yes, that if you believe in a God who is the anthropological God, anthropomorphical God, who's then standing there, the stern but loving Father, but ready to wield infinite punishment and then infinite reward, and then always there, and I created you, but now you have free will, so look out. That, of course, the Dalai Lama doesn't believe that's true. But okay, number one, we just don't believe it is true at all. Period. We just feel that's just not true, just like apples don't fall up. But nevertheless, well, after all, if you believe that, I can imagine how it might be useful for some people. All right, true enough, but I am not content there. I can't say, okay, now mission accomplished, problem solved. I think of in Buddhism, and now we go kind of deep level, the teachings on the middle way view, and I know you've been exposed to it quite a bit through His Holiness and probably other people, but the middle way view, which in the mind, I get the impression that this is where, as we go deeper into Christianity, Buddhism, this is where there's a fork in the road, and that is Buddhists believe in dependent origination. That all the phenomena arise in mutual interdependence, and all phenomena are empty of their own intrinsic identity, their inherent existence, their autonomous self-existence, the Ding an sich. And this is true for the whole of reality, right? And so my impression is that at least some Buddhists, and very possibly the Buddhists, the Dalai Lama himself, but I'd have to sit down and say, is this still something you believe, or did you ever believe it? That this is where the Christian would have to say, but no, God is absolute. God truly created the universe, metaphorically or literally. That was the first 6 days, and then we came on afterwards. And this is why scientists, all these devout Christians who started the scientific revolution, they were seeking to understand what God had created. And it was absolutely out there in and of itself, created by an absolutely existent God, and therefore we have some real absolutes there, and therefore we have absolute space, time, matter, and energy coming out of Newtonian physics. And then, but the Buddhists would respond that we don't believe in any of the absolutes. Buddha is not inherently existent, samsara is not inherently existent, that the only invariant truth that is true from all cognitive frameworks, so here's a big statement, is that all phenomena are empty of inherent nature, which means that not that they're not true or they're illusory or somehow that it diminishes their value, but everything that we know, and certainly this way, everything that we know within a dualistic framework, and that is you are not I, you are an Englishman, I'm an American, and so forth, this is a Christian church, not a Muslim mosque, and so forth, everything we know within that framework of this and that everything we know to be true, that we posit as existence, is existent relative to our modes of perception and conception, but is not already prefabricated, existent in and of itself, but arises relative to. So it's kind of a quantum mechanical theme of rising relative to the system of measurement. Now, if this is true, I wonder really, and this is an open question that deserves a lot more time than we can give to it now, but is this really fundamentally at its core incompatible with Christian belief? If it is, I relax and say, okay, there we are, we found a meaningful difference. Or when we find Augustine saying that if you understand it, that's not God, or a number of the other statements that you quoted, but there was every image of God is an idol, or if you can understand it, it isn't God. Might this be getting at something similar?
Yes, I'm sure it is. And what we can say about the nature of things, that they are empty, that they're interdependent and they are not permanent, that's demonstrably true. And it seems to me a very good definition of a creature.
Yes.
A creature is something or someone that does not call it, is not independent, is interdependent, or is dependent and interdependent, clearly, and is also immortal, is going to die or change its form. But even we can say that we can agree on, whether we call it dependent origination or creation, very, very similar. But behind that, there is still a horizon of our knowledge, which is where did this come from? Well, what we can say with science now, in a way that even previous scientists weren't able to do, is that everything that is observable and measurable, knowable, in this expanding universe began, as far as we know, at a particular instant. And what lies behind that may be an innumerable series of creations or of universes or parallel universes. We don't know. And maybe one day we will push that horizon of knowledge further back, but at the moment we can all... Now, how do we interpret that horizon? Do we say that it is the mystery? And in some ways it's easier to accept that with the idea of a creator God. That is a mystery. We don't know why this came into being. The big question of philosophy, why does anything exist at all? How does, apart from speculating upon pre-existing universes, which is maybe as useless as speculating about what happens after death, how do you see this boundary of our knowledge?
There's a text that you'll know immeasurably better than I, but the cloud of unknowing. I simply know of it from medieval period, I believe.
Yes, 14th century.
14th century. To find parallel, and again, just looking for similarity, not leaping to equivalence, but there is a view, and this is a view that a whole school of theory and practice of meditation in which the Dalai Lama has been trained and has great respect for it, and he teaches it. But it's not where the book, it's almost like he was a Jesuit and then he was trained then in some mystical tradition in addition. Because much of his training as a Gelugpa monk is very orderly. I mean, my sense is that this is true of the Jesuit. It's very orderly, it's very intelligent, it's logically set forth, it's got a sequence to it, it just makes sense start to finish. And it's laid out in the culmination of the path is Buddhahood itself, full awakening, and we achieve it through the gradual purification and development of our mind continuum. And that we all have the potential for achieving enlightenment. So it's laid out very rationally. But the school of theory and meditation that I've been trained in now for the last 22 years, which I find profoundly complementary in the deepest sense of that term to what I received for the first 20 years. First 20 years is very much in the Dalai Lama school. The last 22 years in the school that Dalai Lama has had a lot of exposure to, but that's not where he grew up in. And that is this great perfection, or Dzogchen. There, it's a very different approach. The use of language is different. The use of language is different. So we can ask, for example, in this earlier, I would call it developmental approach. As in science, a lot of the language is descriptive. It's descriptive. In the past, we had previous incarnations. In this lifetime, we are sowing causes for which there will be fruits to be experienced in future lifetimes. There's karma, and here's the liberation from it. It's all quite descriptive. But when you move to this great perfection perspective, they said, that all of this is just a play of, all that you're describing is a play of illusion. That if you view this from an ultimate perspective outside of time, beyond present, past, and future, outside of time, from a truly awakened perspective, that of primordial consciousness, nothing that you know is really real. And what is real is that which you cannot know with the mind that you identify with now. But at the same time, although it is inconceivable, it's not unknowable. But then with what mind is it knowable? Not the mind that you're very familiar with. Because there's a point where you simply have to break through that, to release it, to utterly surrender it, and then another mode of knowing rises up from the very depths of your being, and this is knowing through identity. It is knowing in a non-dualist...
Co-natural.
It is co-natural, yeah.
Be still and know that I am God.
That certainly comes to mind,
Yes,
and I'm familiar with that phrase indeed. And so from that perspective, I'm wondering there, and it's an open question, but I know where my working hypothesis lies, that when we go to that depth, where it's from that depth, from that dimension of reality, which I referred to in this Dujum Lingpa quote, He's speaking of pristine space, of primordial consciousness, and indivisibility between the two. And it is out of this ground that the universe that we experience emerges and into which it dissolves. Out of that ground which can be known, but can be known only from within and not from without. Here, it's not much of a leap to say, but this is the ground. The whole universe was created from this. What do you? I mean, it's the display. It's an effulgence. It's a creation and an emanation from that ground. And so now the notion of, and then we can say, do you ever personify? Do you ever provide iconography of that dimension of reality? And the answer is yes. It's called Samantabhadra.
How can we not?
Well, yeah, here we are as human beings. We have to be able to relate to this somehow, and not just tell it inconceivable. It's throwing a brick wall and said, you can't go there, but if you could, it would be really cool. Say, all right, you can't go there with a conceptual mind, but now consider Samantabhadra, literally all good, totally good, primordial Buddha, and then manifesting symbolically, sometimes even in union. So Samantabhadra, the male form, is the personification of primordial consciousness. Samantabhadri, the consort, in their divine union, is the absolute space of phenomena. So consciousness and space, but indivisible union. But there it is. It looks rather humanish, but it's said. But this is the symbolic representation of the deepest ground, and there it is. And this is the ground of all being. So it looks like a creator slipped in. And by the way, it looks a lot like God.
And God's having a joke.
And God's then it's all of this is the play.
Yeah, great.
To be continued.
Very good.
I don't think we've had the final word.
The only way to answer a question is to make it bigger.
That's right. And then run for the airplane.
Okay.
The mic so that we could hear what you're saying. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your talk this morning, and for both of you sitting there. It's really important to see two religions being together. But the question I would like to ask is, if we are going to move into the modern era, and between you there's a lot of warmth and common ground, for the people out there like myself who don't feel they now belong to one religion, there doesn't seem to be a growing space, or for people who, an awful lot of people seem to want to cling to one religion or another. And for the people who understand all the different religions and are looking at the common ground and want to be around people with this common ground and this affinity and value of love, there doesn't seem to be a growing space without belonging to one religion or other. Could you please, and it's interfaith groups again of faith, but what's really needed, I feel, to broaden this wonderful that you're doing is actually to acknowledge the fact you don't need a fixed religion to reach the space that we're all reaching for. Otherwise, because the last thing is that labels, as I've been reading a book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, is about labels discriminate, and by clinging to one religion, surely that's an ego-based.
Well, I agree that one shouldn't cling to your own religion. That's what dialogue is about, is learning to be non-attached. And in fact, that's the best way to understand and appreciate and know more. I mean, I feel through dialogues like this, I don't feel my Christian faith or identity is diminished or diluted. Quite the reverse. It pushes me to a deeper level of, of encountering what that means. And but there is a phenomenon today which you're expressing yourself to be part of, which is that of many people who, like Groucho Marx, say, I wouldn't want to be a member of any club that would have me as a member. Well, a variation on that anyway, not exactly. No, not exactly that. No, I'm sorry. But it's the idea that belonging to something is a diminishing of your capacity for a universal consciousness or universal tolerance and appreciation. I don't think that's true. I mean, our whole cultural and our psychological identity is configured on belonging to a family. We would see it as something of a handicap if you didn't have a family to grow up in, even if it was an imperfect family. And a culture and language, Very few people, Alan is multilingual, but very few people are easy in more than one language. And so it seems to me natural enough that we should be grounded and rooted in particular communities or particular traditions. But as we mature in them, they give us an identity, they give us boundaries. Children need boundaries. But as we mature, we don't necessarily have to kick them all away. But as we mature in them, we learn that there are others, and that we can see the similarities and the differences that we were talking about in dialogue. And a maturing consciousness evolves, I think, out of that dialogue, But it's not about clinging. Now, maybe, it is a fact that there are many people today who would say that they don't have a center of gravity in any particular tradition. Whether that is the future, or whether it's part of a transitional period we're in, which is partly due to the failures of the Western institutional Christianity to respond to the wisdom needs and spiritual hunger of people, I don't know, to be honest. But it does seem to me yet we haven't replaced that need for belonging yet, anyway. And I was thinking of a young girl I was talking to recently who had to had to write down a list of the things she wanted to do before she died, when she was leaving school, graduating. And the second or third thing she wrote down was, be a local. Very interesting. This is a girl brought up in the era of Facebook and, easy travel and, a very ecumenical kind of world. And what she felt she wanted to be when she grew up was someone rooted in a particular community, whatever she meant by be a local, I don't know. So I'm not sure that being a local means that you're not also global. It may even be that being local is necessary for being truly global.
I agree. I come right back to the ecosystem notion. That is, even the ideal, thinking, well, we can all live in peace, if we now all converge in upon the same kind of unified, undifferentiated belief system, and we all adopt the same practices that don't rub anyone the wrong way, like mindfulness, who's really against it? And loving kindness, who's against it? Okay, well, let's make that our new religion, just mindfulness and loving kindness. And let's not believe in much of anything, because that divides us, and it's all clinging to beliefs. I don't buy that. I really don't. As Father Laurence said, to belong to tradition doesn't necessarily mean to cling to it or have it become an object of attachment. Having said that, if one does belong to a tradition, the Vipassana tradition, Tibetan Buddhism, one of the various sects of Islam and so forth, this whole issue of idol is not only that images can become idols, meditative practices can become idols. I really quite strongly believe. But you're not following the pure meditation, because our group teaches the pure meditation, and then it's just the one that you're fixated on, And so when it's grasping onto the vehicle and conflating that with the whole point. So for myself, the sense of belonging, that is, where am I home? Where do I feel? That just speaks to my heart. It just speaks to my heart. It's not a matter of clinging, but I know for myself now, I've gradually, over 42 years of being a Buddhist, I've come now and just feel I've come to a point of rest where I'm just happy. I look the wide open horizons in front and I say, the direction is very, very clear. And for me, that which when I'm heading off to a 6-month solitary retreat in about 6 months, I'm just thinking, that's it, exactly there's the path that I'm utterly devoted to. Just every cell of my being says, there's the path. And for me, at this phase in my spiritual practice, is this Dzogchen, this great perfection. Now, a lot of the teachings I've received are not Dzogchen, and I respect them, and they're part of what I'm bringing to the table. But right now, this is just the path that just my heart sings. But this isn't saying, well, if you're not doing that, somehow you're not quite up to snuff. It's not that at all. It's just that here's where I feel, my heart is really at home, And for other people, I'm sure they'll have that same feeling following Roman Catholicism, maybe following John Cassian, maybe we'll be following, some other contemplative tradition or what have you. So I see that as quite different than attachment. But again, in terms of common ground, because I do emphasize that very strongly, and a point of like setting out on a voyage, that if we start out with common ground, then I think where we will wind up is bound to be good. And a common ground that I think is clear enough, crystal enough, that it's got a sharp focus and not so hard that it excludes, is a notion now that permeates the Christian contemplative tradition, but it also permeates the Buddhist contemplative tradition, and the Taoist and the Hindu and others, is the notion, and as a starting point, and it's not a new religion, not even a notion of that, and that is the Greek notion of eudaimonia. Eudaimonia, it's a really good term. I'd love to see this now on the lips of everyone. Oh yes, eudaimonia, that 5-year-olds all over the world, eudaimonia. It's a Greek term, and I choose the Greek because who really hates Aristotle? Who hates Socrates? Can't stand the guy. I mean, not so much. I disagree with a lot of Aristotle, but I can't say, yuck, Aristotle. Eudaimonia, it's not even Aristotle's invention, but it's a notion of human flourishing, embraced by Augustine, of human flourishing, of genuine happiness, that is more than a happy feeling, as Augustine was quick to point out, the Buddhists also. It's more than just feeling good all the time, but it is, in a sense, as a garden flourishes, so may a human being flourish. And that notion that we can flourish by the way of life that we follow, flourishing by an ethical way of life, a non-violent, a benevolent way of life, whether you meditate for one moment or not, you can say, all right, I've entered into a path of flourishing. Doesn't mean I don't have bad days, I don't feel unhappy on occasion, doesn't mean I'll never grieve, like in the loss of a loved one or some natural calamity. But a notion of truly flourishing by the way we engage with the environment, with other people. That's tangible. It's not some abstract notion, and that's not something we have to wait till tomorrow or another lifetime to experience. And then a deeper dimension of flourishing that comes, and I will use this term, I've used it a lot, of meditation. And meditation is where the hard work is. It is a transformation, it is the cultivation of virtue, it is the overcoming of vices, it's developing a wide array of virtues that can be cultivated in the heart and mind, such that even if you're living in solitude, and hardly any engagement with the world, explicit engagement with the world around you, you're drinking the sweet waters of solitude, and the sweetness coming from your own mind, right? And that's eudaimonia, that's human flourishing. And then finally, beyond that, as Augustine says, as the Buddhist tradition says, it is knowing that liberates us from the bondage of delusion and ignorance. Finally, the truth-given joy. And this is the deepest one, the most irreversible one, the one that's truly transcendent. And it's not something you earn, you acquire. It's something where you clean the bowl, you poise it, you make it utterly open, and then the vessel is so pure, so receptive, that then you receive something of infinite value that you could never earn. You could meditate for 1,000,000 years and you still haven't meditated long enough, right? And so that deepest level, and that, I would say absolutely in the Buddhist tradition, Dzogchen tradition, that's something you don't acquire, and you don't earn, and you don't get there by effort. That's the point where you finally release all effort and you release all doing, and then it arises up to meet you. So deepest level of eudaimonia. And so these themes, I would imagine, I would expect, I'm in a wild guess here, that nothing that I've just said in that strikes Lawrence's ears as, well, oh man, well, that's where we jump off the boat. Oh, not us, And yet everything I was saying was just core Buddhism. I wasn't putting together a new religion. That was just core Buddhism. Used a Greek term, but that's just because I'm a Westerner. But there, if we start there, with that theme, I think we're setting on a contemplative path that you may start out as a Taoist, a Hindu, a Christian, Sufi, or what have you, but it is common ground. And then as one follows one path, if one starts to find differentiations, then one sees, yes, but we started in the same place. So the differentiations must be to be celebrated.
So do you think Jesus would have said, if he'd known about Buddhists? I don't think he went to Ladakh.
Yeah, dubious.
Dubious. Neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free, Christian or Buddhist.
I think so.
Something for you to chew on at lunch.
But this will be less than 1 minute. If we start there, noting that human flourishing cannot come about without ethics, without virtue, and virtues that we could agree on a lot, and perhaps all of us, we can come up with a pretty long list. If it starts there, the motivation, the point of setting out on the voyage, if it starts there, then whatever differences might flow out of that common ground must be celebrated. Whereas we're starting out with fundamentally different questions, fundamentally different quests, then the differences might really divide. And say, oh, that's where I jump off, that's where I jump off.
Good.
So that's where there's a sense of ease, and where follow that path, and then if at some point you feel, but now having practiced for 1, 5, 10 years, now I found a home in a particular tradition, then take delight in that. It didn't divide in a, how do you say, a destructive way.
Yes, or even that we should begin the journey, maybe the next generation of well-educated children with meditation practice. There's a school not far from here where it was a Church of England school where the teachers wanted to teach meditation to the children, realized that a third of the class were Muslim, wrote to the parents, and she said, do you mind if we do meditation together? And nobody objected. So, maybe there's a new generation where people start from a different place. If we could start both with a common ground and some understanding of what the common ground means, which is the common ground is a starting point in a way, but it's also the goal.
Yeah.
And a sense of belonging to a particular tradition, where we feel called or where we feel most, and just a feeling of calling.
Yes.
You felt called through your connection with the Dalai Lama. Well, and Jesus says, you did not choose me, I chose you. So there's a sense that we don't just pick our tradition off, Sainsbury shelf, but it's we who are chosen.
I think that's true.